Okay, let's get started. Hopefully you have all submitted the 10th and final deliverable. Feels good? Okay, now you can move on to the final project where you have much more freedom in taking your deliverable 10 and turning it into a system where you can teach someone American Sign Language. Let's talk about the final project. I'm going to go through, I put up this document, it's linked from the schedule, but I want to read through it all together so we're all on the same page and expectations are clear, because for some parts of the final project we don't have a lot of wiggle room, so I want to make sure we're all clear on expectations. Ask me any questions as we go through this, and we'll make sure we're all on the same page for the final project. Okay, in red at the top, you're handing in your Leap Motion device during our exam period, which is here Tuesday, December the 11th at 7:30 in the morning. My apologies, I have no control over exam scheduling. I will bring donuts and coffee for everyone. You bring your brain and we will get through the exam period together. Okay. So please, please, please do make sure to bring the Leap Motion device. If we don't get it back, you don't get a grade for the final project. Fair? Okay. All right. So let's talk about the final project. There are 3 parts to the final project. We're going to talk about those 3 parts. First one are going to be interim videos. So every week between now and the end of the semester, you're going to be submitting a 1-minute video which is demonstrating that you're making progress on your final project to us. Those are the interim videos. If you have a look at the schedule now, you will see that like the deliverables, I now have a link to the interim video. If you click on that link, it will simply take you to this PDF, which explains everything about the final project and the interim video. Next Wednesday by 11:59, as usual, you'll submit a link that points to a 1-minute interim video, which demonstrates you're making progress towards the final project. Okay. So 3 parts of the final project, the interim videos, and then the night before the exam period, you're going to be submitting in Blackboard a written report. It's just a summary of your final project, the added functionality, and the user testing, which we'll talk about in a moment. Finally, the third part is going to be a 2.5-minute YouTube video that you're going to be submitting, and we'll talk about that as well. We have currently in the class 60 students. You wouldn't know it by looking around this morning, but there are 60 of us in this class. If you take 60 and you multiply it by 2 minutes and 30 seconds, that just about fills our 2 hour and 45-minute exam period, plus 2 7-minute breaks. So what we're going to do, starting at 7:30 in the morning on Tuesday, December the 11th, we're going to have one long playlist, YouTube playlist, and in that YouTube playlist are going to be 60 2.5-minute videos with 2 7-minute breaks built into that playlist. I'm going to press play on the playlist at 7:30 in the morning, and it will end at exactly 10:15 a.m. When your video comes up in the playlist, you come to the front, you talk over your video for 2.5 minutes, grab a donut, sit back down, next student comes up, next student, and so on. If you've taken my evolutionary robotics class, this is how things work. As long as everyone does their part, it's a lot of fun, and you get to see a lot of different approaches to teaching ASL. So, interim videos, written report, and final video. Question?
On the syllabus, the grade scale for the class has 3 written reports?
Yes, I'm sorry, that was left over from last year. I updated that. If you go and look at the syllabus now, instead of saying 3 written reports, it now says 3 interim videos, which are the 3 weeks we have remaining in the semester. Yes?
One of the interim videos, it'll override the...
It does, and we'll talk about that in a moment when we talk about the videos.
Is there a written exam at all?
There's no written exam. Unless you want one. No?
Will the videos be ordered alphabetically?
They are not ordered alphabetically. The order of the videos will be shown at 7:30 in the morning. So you may be first. Be here at 7:30. Who knows? Okay. Any other questions about the overall organization? Okay, let's dive down into the details. Between now and the submission deadline, what are you going to be doing? You're going to be adding some additional functionality to your system and doing some user testing to see how usable your system is. Okay, so I put up here a couple of examples of additional functionality. You can pick one of these and do it. You can come up with one of your own. They're all here to sort of give you an estimate about the amount of functionality we're looking for. You've got 4 weeks until the final exam period. I think all of the examples here could easily be done in 4 weeks. The remainder of that time is the user testing part. Okay, so for example, you could, for example, teach the users increasingly long sequences of digits, right? So once they learn digits 0 through 9, we want to really make sure that they can do it without thinking about it, right? So you might flash up 3, 1, 4, and they need to sign 3, 1, 4, right? Within some time period. As they get better at that, you might increase the sequences that are shown. If they're making more and more errors, you might decrease the sequence back to just single digits, right? So again, we're looking in all of this for some sort of adaptivity. Your system is sensing how well or how poorly the user is doing and is making things more challenging or easier. Okay. As you might remember when we first talked about ASL, we restricted ourselves to just single digits because some of the letters of ASL require motion like J, which goes like that, which means in order to recognize J, you wouldn't capture just a single frame, you'd have to capture multiple frames, right? So that makes things more challenging for the KNN. You can tackle that if you want. As you can probably guess, this is a little bit more challenging than the others. You might throw in a scattering of ASL letters instead, leaving out J, and I think it's Z. There's 2 of the letters that have motion in them. So you might add in some additional static letters as well. I think I mentioned this example before. You could display some equation. Someone has to do the math in their head and then sign the answer. So you're working on math and ASL at the same time. You could try and gamify your system in some way. You get additional points for doing certain things. You can unlock achievements and badges and so on. Can you incentivize users to progress through this educational system? As we all know as students, not always fun to learn. Can you make it a little more fun to learn ASL? Okay, or again, as I mentioned, include some functionality of your own choosing. Should be something at about this level of difficulty. Seems reasonable. Yes?
If we did something in our past, like in 9 or 10, which like we would include this final project,
Yep.
we decide that it doesn't match what we want to do, could we like take away some of the functionality that we did?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so if there's some functionality in there that you want to remove and add something different, that's perfectly fine. Yep, no problem. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about the interim videos. There are going to be 3 of them, and altogether they're going to add 4% to your final grade. I'm just going to switch to a calendar for a moment. So we are here Thursday, November the 8th. Your first interim deliverable is going to be due the night of Wednesday, November the 14th. We have a much needed rest this week for Thanksgiving. Your second interim video will be due on Wednesday, the 28th of November. And the third and final one is Wednesday, the 5th of December. 3 interim videos. Okay. Okay, as mentioned, your first interim video will replace your lowest deliverable. So, for example, if your worst deliverable, you got 2 out of 5, and you get 4 out of 5 for interim video 1, your worst deliverable is now 4 out of 5.
What if we didn't do badly on any of our?
We will cover your quizzes. We will find some gap. If you don't have 5 points as a gap in your score so far, we'll hold on to it possibly for the final project. It'll make up for something in your final grade. We will find something. Okay. What are you doing in this video? Again, it's 1 minute long. The TA is grading 60 of these, so we're trying to keep things somewhat reasonable. In this video, we're going to hear your voice. So as you're shooting the screen in your hand, you're speaking and your phone is picking up the audio. In this video, you should be able to hear your voice. You're going to tell us over the 1 minute period what your new functionality is. While you're doing so, you'll be shooting video of the screen and demonstrating the beginnings of that functionality. Okay, so for example here, let's say you choose the math and ASL example. So you sign a couple of single digits for about 20 seconds, and then we see that your system recognizes that you're doing perfectly on single digits. So it switches to showing 3 plus 4, 11 minus 2. You're saying that in your video. You can now see that my system has detected that I'm doing well and is now challenging me to do math as well. It's showing me 3 plus 4, which obviously the answer is 7, and here's me signing 7, and there's the check mark on the screen showing that I got it right. That's it. That's what we're looking for in the 1 minute. Okay. Due in Blackboard as usual next Wednesday at 11:59 p.m. The second interim video is going to be due 2 weeks later after the Thanksgiving break, which will give you plenty of time while your friends and family are digesting their turkey to come and try out your system. For those of you that are heading home, take your Leap Motion device with you and try this out on friends and family at home, or find someone else here on campus who can do this with you. Okay, so you're going to shoot another 1 minute video, again shot of your screen and you narrating. In this case, you're going to be shooting another person using your system, not you. You're holding the phone, shooting and narrating. They're using the system. You should not tell the person what the system does or how it works. You can only get them started in the video by telling them to wave their hand over the device. So the start of your video is us seeing someone else, and you say, wave your hand over this thing sitting on the device, and then you're quiet, and we're watching them, their hand, and the screen.
Are you allowed to say put your hand up and keep it flat over the device? Because I know there was some discrepancy, like the data, like there was a 2, I think, that like the hand is detected where it's a little more.
You should not give them any additional coaching. If you feel that you need to, then you need to alter the visualizations in your system, like putting in an animation like this, or what have you, right? So an important point, though, is that if something goes wrong with your user, they put their hand over the device like this, and they never figure out anything other than that. That's what we're looking for in the video. We are not looking for your user to use your system perfectly and everything to go well. We, as the instructors, and you also, were observing what are the confusing parts of your system. So maybe the user figures some things out and then they get confused about actually signing and check marks and red crosses and put your hand back to the center. I guarantee you, if your user has not seen your system before, there will probably be parts during which they are confused, and hopefully you're able to capture some of that in the video. Margaret. Yeah, I guess you can if you want. We'd like to get the first minute of a naive user using your system for the first time. If you have to reshoot something and so on, that's okay. What we're really looking for here is we're sort of looking through the video through your eyes as the developer. That we and you can clearly see that was clear, that wasn't clear, and so on. Okay. Yeah, in most cases, some part of the video will capture the person being confused, having to start over. They have to backtrack. Their hand leaves the thing, and they can't figure out how to bring it back and restart the system. That's what we're looking for. Now, of course, you could coach your user beforehand. We're doing this on the honor system. It's also useful for you if you find a true naive user. You've probably bothered your flatmate to death with your project already. Some of your friends might already be very familiar with your system. Try and find someone who's never seen it before and has never seen a Leap Motion device before. You'll be able to extract a lot of useful information about things that you didn't realize about your system. You are so familiar with your system now, you might not know which are the confusing parts, right? Remember when we talked about the HCI design process? We had sort of that star pattern, and in the center of the star pattern was user testing. Given the time constraints of the semester, we're only doing user testing at the end. Ideally, we would have been doing this throughout the whole process. Okay. That's what we're looking for in interim video 2. And then the Wednesday after we're back from Thanksgiving, you're submitting that interim video. Okay. Interim video 3 is due a week later. Again, it's worth 2%. Again, it's a 1-minute video. And in this 1-minute video, we want to see you finalizing your functionality. You might not have built all of your new functionality in by the end of the first interim video. By now, you should have most of it in. So continuing the above example, you might now show that your system now switches from displaying single digits to equations as a function of the skill of the user. So let me backtrack. In interim video 1, maybe you just show single digits for new users, and you show equations if somebody logs in again for a second time. It's not really adaptive. In interim video 3, you're actually showing switching between digits and equations based on the ability of the user. You've made it dynamic by interim video 3. Okay. For example, if they sign 10 digits in a row, right, the system switches to math. If they fall back below the performance threshold, it switches back to single digits. We'd also like you to mention, during this 1-minute video, improvements you've made based on the weak points you identified in interim video 2. The user was confused about fists versus open hand. You can see we've added in an additional visualization here that shows that they should keep their hand open, right? Just to show that you're responding to what you learned from your users. Okay, that will take us to the end of the semester. Any questions about the interim videos? Yes?
Are we allowed to have text on the screen now?
Yeah, you can have text, but we can't assume that the reader can read it. So you could put up a scoreboard, for example, of user names and numbers of actual points if you want. What we don't want is, okay, user 1, 2, 3, now you should do the following. So no instructions with text, but you can put up text like points and badges and usernames, that kind of stuff is fine. A timer, something that counts down, that's fine.
Is it okay to like label charts? Because in Delta I found it really difficult to like label, you know, which chart represented the user and which one represented like everybody.
Yeah, I think that's fine. That's fine. If you want to label the charts again, that's me, that's someone else, that's the crowd. That's perfectly fine. Just no verbal instructions to the users, right? All the coaching, all the teaching is going to be done visually. Make sense? Yep.
If we have a bug in our system from a previous deliverable,
Yes.
You're going to be evaluating it solely on the new functionality, correct?
If you have a bug in your original code, yes, we're going to just try and focus on the new functionality. Obviously, if the bug is bad enough that your system isn't working and you can't demonstrate what we're looking for in the interim videos, better go back and find the bug. Sorry, with the warmer and colder? Yeah, so again, if there's some function, if things are getting crowded, you can remove some of the functionality. That's perfectly fine and put something back in. Hopefully things like warmer, colder, and timers, they've given you an idea of some new functionality you might want to add. So if you want to rip some stuff out and add new stuff in, that's fine too. Yeah. This is also an opportunity to kind of clean the interface and the process and so on. Yes? It is not the video, that's correct. We're going to talk about that video in a moment. This is just demonstrating you're making progress towards the final project. Okay. Okay. Of course, between the 5th and the 11th, you have other exams and other things going on, so you're not going to be doing very much between the 5th and the 11th. Basically, just writing up everything you've done and the results from your user testing, which we'll talk about now. Okay. So the written report, again, you're submitting this by 11:59 the night before the exam period. 3 pages, not very long, in which you summarize your added functionality. So on 1 page, a description of the functionality. You might have a figure here, which is sort of showing a storyboard of what happens. The user sees this, the user does that, then the user sees that. Just to give us an idea in 1 page what you've added. Yes, it's all right. Double-spaced is fine. It's up to you. Length isn't really important here. We're trying to keep it short for your sake. Be short and concise to communicate to us what you've added. That's fine. Okay. And then on the second page, how you needed to alter your code to do so. So this you can do sort of verbally. We had to alter the KNN. I had to go in and make these changes to the number of panels and how things was drawn. We just want to get a sense of how you altered your code to do so. Again, you can put some code snippets if you want here. What we don't want on page 2 is just a monolithic wall of code that doesn't mean much to us, right? So like you've seen in the deliverables themselves, maybe a short paragraph, a code snippet, short paragraph, code snippet, whatever. Just give us a feel for what you needed to change under the hood to add this new functionality. Okay. Final page is results from 2 rounds of user testing. So you did user testing during Thanksgiving and you demonstrated it in your interim report after Thanksgiving. Hopefully you go back to either the same users or 2 different users. And you can do this before December the 5th. Doesn't really matter to us. Just do a second round of user testing. And you're trying to collect some quantitative data from those 2 rounds of user testing. How many seconds did it take until the user started to actually do some signing, to actually start learning ASL? How many seconds elapsed before they were good enough that they triggered the equations rather than single digits? How many times did someone have to back up and go forward again? It's up to you. It should be something that's relatively straightforward. It should be something that you're measuring in the system itself rather than you having to do it with a stopwatch or externally. You remember your dictionary of dictionaries, your sort of very basic rudimentary database. You might want to add something there that's recording something about the user testing. You're collecting that information from user 1 and user 2 during the Thanksgiving break or slightly after. Then you're recording the same things afterwards, after you've made some improvements. And what we're looking for in that third page, did your user find your system more usable the second time? And do you have any data to back up that claim? So we're not doing surveys here. You're not asking your user how usable was it, how much fun was it to learn with the system. We're trying to do a little bit of quantitative analysis. It doesn't have to be much. Even if you get a negative result, it was just as hard for users after you made the improvement than before, that's fine, as long as you have data backing up the fact that your users did not find it more usable the next time around. Right? This is more you demonstrating to us that if you had more time, you could do more quantitative analysis of user testing, and that would sort of guide how you go back and make the system usable. As you'll see when you do your user testing, sometimes you sort of realize, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that was so confusing. It seems so clear to me. Now with a naive user, I see it. Sometimes the feedback is a little more subtle, right? If you were testing with 100 users, you might see a bimodal distribution. Some people figure things out immediately, but half of your audience, it takes them forever to figure out how to use the system. Why this big spread? We obviously don't have time to go down into that kind of detail. We want you to show us that you're moving in that direction. It took X seconds for this user to do that, but the second user, it took them twice as long. I may not know exactly why, but at least I'm collecting that data. Okay, 3 pages submitted again the night before. Any questions about the written report? Okay, so the final video is going to be 2 minutes and 30 seconds long. Not 2:31, not 2:29. We have 175 minutes. We have 60 videos to get through. I don't know about you, but I'd like 2 short breaks during that period. So be careful that it's exactly this long. So obviously 2 minutes and 30 seconds is not a lot of time. So we're going to budget it as following. In the video, the first 30 seconds is going to be just a PowerPoint or a Google slide in which you summarize the functionality added to your system. So during the exam period, your video shows up in the YouTube playlist. You come to the front, and for 30 seconds, you've got a little bit of text on the screen, and you're telling us what you did. It could be a series of bullet points, but better to kind of show something visually. The following 60 seconds is you demonstrating your system. Obviously, the TA and I have already seen that in the interim videos, but the rest of your student colleagues haven't. So 60 seconds showing you exercising the new functionality of your system. So we're watching you do it, and you're up here at the front, and you're telling us what you're doing and how and what that new functionality is, so we can see it in action. Following 30 seconds, a snippet from your user testing. Maybe you show one of your users actually being confused. And then finally, you end with some quantitative data from user testing. Make sense? Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4 separate videos. If you have video editing software, go ahead and stitch that together into a 2-minute, 30-second video and upload to YouTube. If you do not have video editing software, and when we ran this class last year, YouTube had a simple video editor embedded in it. No longer exists. So we're going to do this. We're going to hack something together here. You can obviously, there's probably some open source video editing software out there. We are not assigning grades based on the beauty of your video. All we want is to make sure it's 2 minutes and 30 seconds long, and it has these 3 parts in it, and it's easy for us to see that. Okay, so here's my suggestion. If you don't have video editing software, set a timer for 30 seconds, and then with your phone, just record your Google slide on your screen for 30 seconds. Upload that to YouTube. Then make a separate video of this 1-minute demonstration. You're recording your screen, and you're demoing the new functionality in your system, which creates a 1-minute video. Upload that to YouTube. Keep going. Take those 4 videos, stitch them together into a YouTube playlist, play the playlist, use your phone and shoot the playlist, which will give you 1 video, which is 2 minutes and 30 seconds long. Upload that video and submit it to Blackboard. It's not beautiful, but it'll work. Again, we don't really care. Okay. Okay, any questions about that? All right, on to the exam period, the oral presentation. You have to submit this final 2-minute, 30-second video by 11:59 the night before. No extensions in this case, because poor Jack is going to have to spend most of the night trying to stitch together 60 videos. If he gets to your name and he cannot find your video in Blackboard, it's not going in the playlist, and you're not presenting your oral presentation the following morning. We can't do that during the exam period, so make sure it's in by that time. Okay. As I mentioned, we'll build into this playlist that Jack is going to make 2 7-minute breaks, which will be calibrated so the whole thing runs for exactly 165 minutes, and we will be out of here at exactly 10:15 a.m. Okay. I'll write the presentation schedule up here, so when you come in at 7:30 in the morning, you'll see 60 names on the board, so you'll know exactly when you're going on. We're not going to pause the playlist. So when you're ready, when it gets to your name, you're going to come up to the front and stand just over here. Whoever is presenting before you, they will be finishing up. And as soon as they finish, you'll walk up, give your presentation. The next person will be on deck, and this will run very smoothly if everyone follows the plan. Okay. Okay, no transition period between presentations. Okay, if you've taken my evolutionary robotics class, you've been through this before. If you haven't, 2 minutes and 30 seconds goes very, very quickly. I suggest practicing. Luckily, since it's so short, you can practice 10 times in a row in 20 minutes, right? Over and over and over again. You want to sort of have this by heart. There isn't time to sort of stumble and go back and start again and so on.
If we record our voice in the video and have audio for it, do we have to present, or can we just have all the information?
I want you to present live. Yeah, I know we could obviously can these and we could just all watch them. It's much more engaging if you come up and walk us through your video. So, sorry, just a reminder, your 2 minute and 30 video, the final one, there is no audio. You are the audio during the exam period.
Can there be audio if it's a part of the functionality?
There can be audio if it's part of your functionality, absolutely. If you're putting in sound or music as part of your system, that's fine. Okay. So you'll be graded for, oh, sorry, question?
Just a quick question.
Yep.
I mean, how much tolerance do you have for humor in a project like this?
You can be as humorous as you want as long as you're able to communicate all the things that we're looking for in the video. By all means, entertain us, but educate us as well. That's fine. Okay. Again, shorter or longer, that we'll deduct grades for that. You don't have a lot of time. Make sure it's all in there. We're grading you for the clarity of your presentation, ability to verbally convey the ideas in that period, a clear description of the functionality and the timing, and so on. Okay. That's it. All good? Okay. As I mentioned, that document is all now embedded in the schedule. Please make sure to consult that between now and the exam period so we're clear on what everyone is doing. Any other questions about the final project? Okay. All right, so back to the lecture material. We are working our way through our section on looking outward and thinking about deploying technology out into the real world, where that technology is directly sensing the real world. That technology is situated. It is sensing things in real time. And we are now talking about robots, which is a particular class of embedded devices that are embedded in the real world, that are also able to move. They are embodied, they have a body, and they use that body as a tool to push against the world. And since they're situated, they sense how the world pushes back. We saw in our discussion about robotics, the Bratenberg vehicles, which demonstrated that interaction is very important when you design robots. We think carefully about the robot itself and its environment and how it can interact with that environment. We can make simple robots and get rich behavior because they're interacting with a rich environment. We then looked at this idea of situated and embodied cognition, what exactly that means. And we're now going to return to lecture 22, and we're thinking about robots not just interacting with the physical environment, but also starting to interact with a social environment. They are directly trying to engage with humans in a social manner and build upon that social interaction. We may or may not finish lecture 22 today. We'll move on to robot-robot interaction. So now we have robot swarms, where each individual member of the swarm is interacting with the physical environment, possibly interacting with humans as well, and also interacting with each other to try and do something that is beyond the ability of any one of the robots. Okay, so lecture 22, we're thinking now about social robots. And as we saw last time, we complicated our picture here. We have robots pushing against the environment, humans pushing against the environment, and also trying to engage in a social interaction where, again, we have this continuous feedback loop. The output of the human becomes the input to the robot, and vice versa. I introduced you to COG last time. This is one of the first social robots built back in the 1990s. And we ended last time with the first of 4 social building blocks we're going to look at. This one's very, very simple, the vestibular ocular reflex. As you move your head, your eyes move in opposition, which again, if you ever come into contact with COG and it locks eyes with you, it's very clear that COG is attending to you. You don't have to guess about what COG is paying attention to. The cue is very clear. It makes it very easy for you to build up a mental model about what COG is doing, which is paying attention to you. Okay. Obviously, the VOR reflex is usually used to pay attention to humans and to look particularly at their face. A big part of the human brain is wired up to recognize faces. Is there a person in my field of view? If so, where? Let's start with the optical illusion in the bottom left. This is the face recognition version of another optical illusion that we've already seen. Which one was it? This is very similar to another optical illusion we saw.
The box problem?
The box, the Necker cube, right? Why is the one in the bottom left like the Necker cube? And I apologize, I'll try and remove this after a while. It's very confusing, very taxing.
The sense of eyes and the mouths really kind of, your brain flips back and forth between which set is the set that like is the actual face and which set is just background information.
Your brain flips back and forth between what is the actual face and what is this additional weird stuff that seems to be showing up, right? It's hard to look at, and that's the point. Your brain is so wired up to recognize faces. When there is something that is right on the threshold of triggering your face recognition algorithm and not, your brain works very hard to figure out, is there a face here or not? So, your eyes attend to her eyes, and your mental model of faces make a prediction. Remember, the brain is a prediction machine. What prediction does your brain make? It makes a prediction that when you saccade down here, to this point, you're going to see a pair of lips, which you do not see. Your eyes land slightly in the wrong place. However, there are lips nearby, so your brain registers a little bit of an error, moves down here, and says, okay, there's lips, but not where I expected. Maybe this is a face, maybe it isn't. So it makes another prediction. Given the lips here, when you attend here, your eyes jump back to this point, which again miss the pair of eyes. Your brain has to figure out which of these to saccade to and focus on, and back and forth you go. If you look at this long enough, you feel like you're getting blurry or dizzy. That's why. Your brain is continuously trying to find evidence for or against the fact that there is a face here. Okay. It's very challenging to recognize faces because, of course, faces come in lots of different shapes and sizes and colors and shades and orientations and so on. We talked about computer vision a couple classes back. This has been a big problem for a long time, recognizing objects in images. We're going to look at a particular computer vision algorithm now. This is somewhat dated. It's now been replaced by deep learning algorithms, which do this much better. The advantage of the algorithm we're going to look at here, which is known as the ratio template algorithm, is that it's relatively simple and easy to sort of understand how it works. Okay, let's have a look at and we're going to explain the algorithm, and we're going to imagine we're going to build this into a robot, so a robot can saccade, look around its environment, and focus on faces. How does a robot find faces in its visual field? Okay. First thing it might do is create this bounding box and move this bounding box across its visual field. And it's looking for a placement of that bounding box in which suddenly there's a lot of color inside the bounding box that is different on average from the color outside. It's found a blob. It may not be a face, but it's something. It's then going to take that bounding box and where it's found different color compared to the background. And it's then going to lie down a bunch of smaller boxes inside the bounding box at exactly this orientation, in exactly this way, which doesn't really look like a face, but kind of. It's going to then take each of these rectangles, and it's going to take the average grayscale inside each rectangle. We're going to throw away color and just focus on brightness. It's then going to look at the average light level or the average grayscale inside of each rectangle and compare relative brightness between pairs of rectangles. Everything you're going to see in the ratio template, as kind of the name implies, everything is going to be relative, not absolute. Okay. What are the kinds of pairs of brightness that you think it's going to be looking for? So for most faces, the region around the eye is darker than the rest of the face. So it's going to be looking, as you can see here, if you look at where the eyes more or less are going to fall, there are a lot of incoming arrows. So the arrows represent that if it's a face, what you expect is the color of the forehead is going to be a little brighter than the eye, right? This isn't always true, but most of the time it's true. Okay. So we can make a bunch of observations about relative light levels of faces, such as, for example, eyes should be darker than other regions, and the nose should be brighter than a lot of other regions on the face. So you can see this rectangle here, which is the there are a lot of outgoing arrows from here. It's expecting to see brightness here and darker by the eyes, the mouth, the shadow under the chin, and so on. Okay, so again, the arrows indicate what should be what. And we're going to use a point system. We're going to take each of these arrows, every single arrow, and if, in fact, lighter is lighter than darker, we give 1 point. If there's no real difference between brightness, between boxes connected by an arrow, no points. If the opposite is detected, what was supposed to be brighter is actually darker, we're going to remove a point. We're going to do that for all of the arrows. And it turns out that if you get 11 or above points for a given bounding box, then it's usually a face, otherwise not. Pretty straightforward, right? So a lot of heuristics that are built in here, given observations about human faces, which aren't perfect. Again, this has been replaced by a lot of algorithms since, but it gives you an idea of sort of what these algorithms are trying to do.
It seems like this algorithm would probably only work on people with very light skin.
Now, we all know about AI bias at the moment. This is part of the problem, right? This doesn't always work for everyone. And we started this course by talking about packed analysis, right? Thinking very carefully about the ways people differ. This makes a difference. Skin color makes a difference. Hats make a difference. Sunglasses make a difference, and so on, right? It's not perfect. Tricky to do. Okay. What other aspects of faces does this algorithm fail on? Skin tone, facial hair, hats.
If the faces are exceptionally different shape than what it expects it to be.
Possibly, yeah, shape maybe makes a difference.
If lighting is uneven, if there's light switch from one side.
Absolutely. So lighting conditions make a difference, not really about faces themselves, but that definitely makes a difference. Face paint on, absolutely. That's definitely going to make things difficult.
If you're missing an eye.
If you're missing an eye, it makes a difference.
If they're looking more to the side.
Absolutely. So this is not going to capture faces in profile, only faces head on, right? What else? Imagine you're the robot and you're scanning a room looking for faces.
Partially occluded faces.
Partially occluded faces, right? Which again is a problem for me as well. I am able to move. But I may not even know that there is a face that's being occluded if I'm relying on the ratio template algorithm.
Maybe if it's mostly in a dark room, so like we could see that there's a shadow behind the person, but maybe if it's dark enough.
Possibly, right? If it's a dark room overall, the ratio template algorithm tries to take care of that by looking for relative light levels, right? Not absolute. Again, not perfect. Okay, so again, this is work that was done quite a while ago, so not perfect, but not bad. You can see on the right the feed, and then on the left, you can see bounding boxes that get 11 or more points. Doing pretty well. It's clearly looking for faces and not just moving objects. Okay, so not this algorithm, but some slightly more sophisticated algorithms were the first algorithms that were built into cameras that when you pointed them at a scene, they would recognize faces. Now those algorithms are much more sophisticated, but gives you a feel for sort of what's going on under the hood and what makes face recognition so difficult. There's a lot of HCI that goes into face recognition algorithms for obvious reasons. Okay, I think we answered that one. Let's move on to something that's a little bit more challenging. So we looked at the VOR reflex, recognizing faces. This is obviously important. So COG, for example, is running the ratio template algorithm. It's now able to find faces in its field of view. And even if COG is moving or other people are moving, it's able to track those faces. If you're COG or a human infant and you've recognized a face, that's great. But so what? How is that going to help you? Why recognize faces?
So you can stare at them.
You can stare at them? Okay, that's great. Not going to get you fed or clothed, though.
I think generally it depends on the function of the robot, but it's important to differentiate between people and non-people, maybe for safety reasons.
Possibly.
Like if you're yourself driving a car, you want to identify what are people and what are lampposts.
Absolutely, right? So if you're an autonomous car running this algorithm, you better be able to recognize human faces in every possible light condition, every kind of face, partial occlusion, not occlusion, light levels, rain, snow, wind, and so on. Once you recognize faces, that's all well and good for an autonomous car, but it needs to do more than that.
I mean, recognizing the faces there is the first step towards identifying whose face it is.
Whose face it is, okay, maybe that matters.
Or after it identifies the face, it has to like kind of identify like where the whole body is, right?
Possibly. Let's say I'm an autonomous car, I'm driving down the road, and I detect a face which is hovering above what I also detect as a sidewalk.
You might need to know like its trajectory, if it's like moving, if it's moving to your path.
Is it moving, right? Is the pedestrian moving? If they're moving towards the road, then okay, that's great. But they may not. They may be stationary, standing on the edge of the road. I recognize the face. What more do I need to know?
The intention of
The intention of the pedestrian. Where are they looking? Are they talking to someone else? Where are they looking? That is extremely important for social interaction. Human infants recognize faces, and then it's very important for an infant to know where is the caregiver looking. If the caregiver is looking at their phone, that's not as good as them looking at me or looking at some food or something, or a block that I would like to have handed to me. How do I know what they're looking at? That's tricky. That's the next building block we're going to look at, which is joint attention. We actually mentioned joint attention already when we talked about the Human Speech Home Project. This one, when you actually start to think about it, is a little bit more challenging. We have our teacher here and our student over here. The teacher is looking at some object, and the student is looking at the eyes of the teacher, right? And how does the student come to know? How do they saccade to jointly attend to the same object? Again, it might seem obvious, but not an obvious thing to do. Not an easy thing to do. Sorry?
Complex vector calculations.
Complex vector calculations, absolutely. As we learned from Bradenberg, right? We're doing differential calculus in our heads.
Will you look at where your eyes are going and then follow straight lines?
You look at where the eyes are pointing and you follow a straight line. Pretty good, right? However, we're dealing with three-dimensional space. It's a little tricky, right? So we can't do 2D, we have to do 3D. You're looking at eyes, right? And you can see pupils in the eyes relative to the whites of the eyes. Is that going to give you a 2D vector or a 3D vector?
I would say that our mental model of the world is 3D.
Our mental model of the world is 3D, absolutely, right? So we're going to put all of these things together, and we're going to look at an example where, again, the experimenters here are going to come up with an idea of how this works, and they're going to build that idea as an algorithm into a robot, and then see whether a robot can jointly attend to what a human is doing. If it works, the human should be able to look at something, and with no further cue, the robot should switch their attention and look at the same object. Okay, so how does this work? They're going to use a relatively simple robot here that has an active vision system. What's an active vision system? Well, pretty simple, as the name implies. It has a vision system, 2 cameras on the top, and it can actively move these. So it can saccade, it can move its eyes. It can move its eyes in 2 ways. It can pan and tilt. So you'll notice in the little cartoon here we have 2 angles, pan and tilt, so how much it's rotating the cameras left and right, and how much it's tilting up and down. And we're going to just treat that as our delta theta down here, which is simply a vector of 2 numbers, how much the robot is panning and tilting. Pretty straightforward. Okay. Okay, we're going to start with the robot recognizing the caregiver's face using the second building block we just talked about. So find the face and then move, pan and tilt the camera until the face is in the center of the field of view. Move the camera then, in addition, to bring any other object into the field of view. Move the camera from the human face to any other object that is also in the field of view. So in this little cartoon example here, in the center pane, the robot has centered the human face in the center of its field of view. And as it's looking at the human face, it sees a couple of other objects nearby, these two objects. And this robot is not yet capable of joint attention, so it doesn't know which one the caregiver is looking at. So it's going to pan and tilt so that one of these two objects is in its center of its field of view. Doesn't really matter which one or the other. When it does, the caregiver is going to give positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. The robot looked at the caregiver's face, then looked at another object, and the caregiver is going to say, good job, you looked at the object that I was looking at, or wrong object, you didn't. So the robot is getting back a single number, +1 or -1, doesn't really matter for our purposes, but it's getting back a numerical signal about whether it did the right thing or not. Okay, how did the robot decide what to do? The robot is instrumented with a neural network. And again, we're not going to go into the details of the neural network. But for our purposes, you can think of this neural network as one big function. This function takes as input all of the pixels from the human face, as well as the current pan and tilt of the camera. Takes that as input, pushes that through this neural network, and this neural network then spits out two numbers, which is change in pan and change in tilt. So the robot sees something, thinks about it, and moves, and it either did the right thing or not. If the caregiver then says, good job, if the robot gets back a +1, there is no change to the neural network. If you did the right thing, there's no need to change your behavior. If the robot did the wrong thing, then some small change is made in this neural network. And we're not going to go into the details of what that change is, but just change it a little bit. Repeat and repeat and repeat. And as you can imagine, by repeating this process long enough, you eventually get a neural network that is no longer looking at one of those two objects at random, but more often than not, it pans and tilts towards the object that the person is also looking at. You can then ask, when you have that successful neural network, what is that neural network doing? Sometimes it's hard to sort of look inside one of these neural networks and figure out what they're doing, but sometimes you can. And as these researchers found, it's doing something not that difficult from what you mentioned. It's ignoring all of the pixels that have to do with the face. It's throwing all that away, except for just a few pixels that are relevant to the whites of the eyes and the pupils themselves. You can imagine, for example, boiling this down to a very, very simple algorithm. If you manage to get 4 pixels from the eye, if it's the lower right pixel that's darkest, if the pupil is down and to the right, then pan and tilt down and to the right until you see an object and then stop. So this is more or less 2D, even though we're operating in 3D. The head is moving in 3 dimensions, but it's a pretty simple process. What happens if there are 2 objects that are down and to the right?
How do you differentiate between?
How do you do it? More pixels, right? Exactly. So I'm pretty far from most of you, and obviously the object that I want you to attend to is pretty obvious. But if you pay attention, some of the times you can figure out which part of the slide I'm looking at, and hopefully you come to attend to the same part of the slide. It's not very obvious. A lot of it is obviously you looking at my eyes, but you're also pulling in additional information, right? Physical context. What have I said? What did I just say? Did I just read item number 1 on the slide? In which case, I'm probably looking at item 2. Given how I teach this course, you can probably figure out which part of the slide I'm trying to get you to attend to without me explicitly having to tell you, and so on. So there are a lot of other cues that are coming in other than just the eyes, which makes social interaction so interesting, but also so difficult for a robot. Like we just talked about with face recognition, you can imagine a lot of joint attention tasks that would be hard to solve with just this problem. If the robot sees that the human is looking down and to the left, and the robot sees from its point of view there are 2 objects down and to the left, which object is it? Does it use more pixels from the eyes? Does it have to pick up some other cue? Maybe the user is kind of pointing in that direction to help. What other information is useful? Okay. This algorithm is obviously very simple. This is still ongoing work in social robotics. You have an autonomous car that has detected a pedestrian standing on the street. Is that pedestrian going to step into the street or not? How do you know? In how many seconds time? Are they crossing with a light, against a light? Do they know that they're about to step into the street? Maybe they're engaged in a conversation with a friend and they're not paying attention. They're attending to something this way, but they're walking this way, right? That is a very important situation for an autonomous car to be able to recognize. Okay, let's switch to the fourth and final social building block we're going to look at here. We don't do too much of this in class, but in normal social interaction, there's a lot of turn taking. Some of that is explicit. I say something or I ask a question, you say something, I say something, and so on back and forth. This is actually a relatively difficult thing to do. When I lived in Zurich, Switzerland, there's a great restaurant there called The Blind Cow, which is run by unsighted employees. You go to the restaurant, you go into the lobby, there's a big menu in the lobby, you pick what you want to eat, and then they take you into the dining hall, which is pitch black. They sit you at a table with your table mates, they bring food, and you eat in complete darkness. If you ever make it to Zurich, definitely make it to the Blind Cow restaurant. I went with 3 other friends. Turn taking broke down. We were sitting eating and you're having a conversation as normal over a meal. It was very hard. It was a lot of, no, you go ahead, no, you go ahead, no, you go ahead. Why?
Well, it's like on a phone conference. You can't see the faces, so you don't know when somebody wants to talk.
It's tricky, right? Most of the time it feels effortless, but you've probably all been in situations where that starts to break down. And it breaks down because the normal expectations you have about the verbal and nonverbal cues that are given off by your interlocutor, the other person you're speaking with, they're not there anymore, right? On a phone conversation, normal one, where you don't see the person, we've built up sort of a way to do that. Again, it's not easy. It takes a while to learn how to do that. Something like Skype is somewhere in between actual face-to-face communication and a phone conversation. It can be a little bit tricky. Okay, how do we get a robot to do that? Also not very easy. We're going to look now at Kismet, which again, we saw Kismet the robot a few weeks back. Kismet is a social robot. As you'll see in the video, it's got VOR in there. It's got face recognition in there. It's also got joint attention in there. And finally, it's going to try and add the fourth social building block, which is turn taking. I'm going to show you 3 videos. So here's some user testing for you. These are naive users. This was work done at MIT. They ran out of the building and they invited people to come into the building and they said, we built this robot. We'd love you to sit down and have a conversation with our robot Kismet. So these are not grad students. They're not undergrads. They're just people off the street that have been invited in to talk to this robot. That's all they know about Kismet. Again, these videos are a little bit old, and so the audio is not great. Hopefully you can hear this all right.
Hi. Hello. Hello.
How did this interaction go?
She kept trying to say hello to it and just didn't understand.
So she kept repeating hello, hello, hello. Why? I guess it's polite, but what is actually going on here?
She never got the response of like hello back.
You say hello, you have a mental model about other social beings. This is a social being which seems to have eyes, and those eyes are locked onto her eyes. It seems to be responding in motion to the motion of her head. Everything seems to be matching your mental model about agency. There is something over there that is paying attention to me. It's got a mouth that moves. Maybe this thing can talk. So I will say hello, and I would expect hello back, right? There's sort of, that was the expectation. She doesn't quite get it, so she keeps repeating it, right? This is almost the social version of the Necker cube now. This almost looks like something that you could have a conversation with, but in this case, not quite.
What was it responding with?
What was it responding with? Good point. It was making noises you weren't able to tell. I'll show you two more, see if you can figure it out, what it's saying. I'm going to show you now the next person. This is the exact same robot. I don't know if it was the same day, but nothing has been changed on the robot. Exact same robot, but different naive user.
I like you, Kismet. You're a pretty funny person. Do you laugh at all? I laugh a lot. Carol says I laugh a lot. I try not to laugh at her. Okay. You're adorable. Who are you? What are you? Yeah, I want to show you something. This is a watch that my girlfriend gave me. Yeah, look, it's got a little blue light in it too. You're like, I almost lost it this week. How are you? You know what it's like to lose something? You are. Yeah. I'm gonna try closing my eyes. Let me try opening my eyes. No, stop. No, I gotta talk now. No, stop. Listen to me. I think we have something going on. Oh, I think there's something here between us. Stop, you gotta let me talk. Stop. Shh. Kismet, I think we got something going on here. You and me. You're amazing. What are you? Bye. Bye. Okay. Alright. You know what? Hang on a second. I still want to talk to you. I got a couple more things I want to say.
So just hang on here a second. There's a couple more things I want to say to you. So that was a few minutes. Rich stayed for another several hours, and the researchers eventually had to say, Rich, would you mind if we move on? And I think they had to drag him out of the room eventually. Okay, you're all now students of social interaction and particular social building blocks. There were a lot of them at play here in this video. What were they? Some of them we already mentioned, some of them are different.
He was motioning with his hands to get Kismet to look at where he was pointing.
He was using his hands to get Kismet to look at what he wanted Kismet to look at.
And sometimes it would look at it would look up when he would shush it.
Exactly. So he shushed at some points. You can go back and watch it, and it quickly attends actually to the finger itself, right? So it's setting off in Rich a lot of check marks in terms of Rich's mental model of the fact that he's dealing with a social being, right?
When Rich looked at his watch, Kismet also looked at the watch.
So Rich looked at his watch, and Kismet didn't initially look at the watch, which Rich saw, and Rich did what?
He pointed at it.
He pointed at it, right? Pay attention to this. You remember back when we talked about Deb Roy and the Human Speechome Project, and we looked at this data, where it turns out that, at least for speech, it's not parents teaching children. It's children teaching parents what they need at certain times, right? So who is the student and who is the teacher here? It's not always immediately clear. Kismet is providing a lot of social affordances. Remember, an affordance is something that says what it can do. The desk is projecting an affordance that it can be written on, and it'll support paperwork. Social affordances are, here's what I am and aren't capable of. I'm looking at you, and when you do this, I look at that. So that says, I am joint attendable. You can draw my attention to the thing that you are attending to. What else is going on here?
Emotion.
Emotion. Okay. Absolutely. And Rich, what about Kismet?
It portrayed like it was sad when he interrupted it.
So when he told it to be quiet and then he raised his voice a little bit and it got sad, do you think Kismet actually gets sad? Of course not, right? It's a Bratenberg vehicle. It's separate from us. What do you think the code is behind there that's causing Kismet to be sad?
If voice volume gets raised, be sad.
If volume goes above a threshold, bow your head. Pretty much that simple, right? So Kismet is made up of hundreds of little if-then-else statements like that, and when you put them all together, a relatively simple agent, right, you get very interesting and rich social dynamics because you have a very good teacher. He is projecting or providing scaffolding, opportunities to engage in social interaction, and because of that interaction between machine and person, you can get away with a relatively simple machine if you have the right teacher. Previous teacher, maybe not so much. Question?
If the voice goes up, you could also be getting like a shouting match.
Ah. So if volume goes up to a certain level, be sad. If it goes up any higher, what do you think Kismet does? Doesn't fight back. Luckily, it's got no arms here. If volume goes really loud, what would you do? Someone starts shouting in your face.
Maybe it like flares its eyebrows and like raises its voice or something.
Its eyebrows go up and its head goes as far back as it can possibly do. I'm surprised you're that upset with me, or I don't know what I did wrong. I'm sorry. You can actually go and watch a lot of Kismet videos online. It's pretty socially intelligent. Okay. There was a question about what Kismet is saying. Has anybody figured out what Kismet is saying yet? Okay. So let's look at our third user, our third participant here. This is Adrian.
Tea. Terry. A piggy.
Cynthia, what's
Okay. What was Adrian saying? Forget Kismet.
He was repeating back to Kismet what Kismet was saying.
He was repeating back to Kismet what Kismet was saying. Was that the direction? A little hard to say. I think you're right. What was Adrian saying? Not a lot, or at least nothing that means anything to me. Maybe it means something to Adrian. I'm not sure. What was Kismet saying? Is this English?
I think I caught tell me. Did you say tell me?
Maybe.
Are they speaking Japanese?
Are they speaking Japanese?
All of the people in these videos are ethnically Asian.
Maybe. Again, I apologize, the audio is not very good in this. Kismet is speaking.
Does he not say anything of
He's
meaning? Just make noises?
correct. He's speaking randomese. You take all of the English phonemes and you stitch them together in random order. And the sequence, the number of phonemes is about the length of English words, 2 or 3 or 4 phonemes. So it sounds like something, right? Maybe it's Japanese, it's not English, but it's something. Maybe Kismet is learning how to talk. From time to time, people think that they actually heard it actually say something. Hard to say, right? It's the social Necker cube. They wanted, in this case, to keep things simple and avoid the language acquisition and understanding problem. So not the Human Speech Home Project. We want to focus on all the social building blocks that go into the supports or the foundations that then scaffold language learning, right? You could imagine then adding in some additional learning language abilities to Kismet. So we're not going to give Kismet the English language. We might give it the ability to start to acquire language. And Kismet, in that case, could have no better instructor than Adrian in this case. Right? Adrian is also learning. They're imitating each other. So this is no longer turn-taking. Now we're into imitation, another social building block, which is obviously very important. And maybe as Adrian starts to acquire English, Adrian could likewise help Kismet acquire English as well. Okay. Okay, so again, we just looked at 4 of dozens or hundreds of social building blocks. We've got a few minutes left, so I want you to turn to your neighbor, and I want you to think about the 4 building blocks. Sorry, we just talked about that. There we go. Okay, I want you to take the 4 building blocks that we just talked about, and I want you to think about programming a rehabilitation robot. So physiotherapists, they often have a human participant. They need to demonstrate an action over and over again. The patient needs to imitate that action. Patient may be injured and may not be able to perfectly imitate exactly what the physiotherapist is showing them. The physiotherapist sees that and alters her demonstration. So a lot of interesting social dynamics that go on during a physiotherapy session. Think about trying to do that. Here's an example of some things that might go into a socially aware rehabilitation robot. What else? What are some of the other physical, social, and cultural contexts that exist in a rehabilitation setting? And how would you create a social robot to exploit those to help rehabilitate someone who's been injured? You got 5 minutes left. Turn to your neighbor, and we'll see what you came up with in a few minutes.
So obviously,
They have some body part. Like example, I can't just kind of English person about this.
it needs to be able to guess.
Okay, what sorts of social dynamics are you going to build into your robot?
It needs to know whether the patient's paying attention.
It needs to know whether the patient is paying attention, right? Depending on the injury, this can be a literally or emotionally painful experience for the participant. Is the participant engaged and willing to go on? Very important.
It also needs to recognize pain itself if the patient isn't.
Absolutely, right? The face recognition part of this should be very clear and should be able to recognize the facial signals of the experience of pain. Very important. What else?
It's maybe kind of a non-functional requirement, but since it's dealing with people that are in trauma, like it's really, really important that it doesn't look scary.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, this might be a traumatic experience in general for the person involved. They come in and they're presented with COG, right? I'd like a human physiotherapist, please. What else? What are some of the other things we've covered in this course that matter here? The robot then slowly expands its imitation towards the proper motion. So start small and move up from there. Where have we seen that before? Scaffolding, right? So a lot of scaffolding goes into physiotherapy. When does the robot remove scaffolding and when does it add more scaffolding? When does it make things easier and when does it make things more challenging?
As the person in therapy is getting better.
Okay, absolutely. So I'm wincing in agony, but I'm getting better and better at the task because it seems that's what the robot wants me to know. So as long as the person is increasing their range of motion, the robot says, great, everything's going well. I'm going to challenge you to keep increasing your range of motion. Right? Not trivial to know, right? It depends on the patient. Other examples?
Maybe adjusting how much encouragement that it gives based on how much difficulty the patient is having or how discouraged they seem.
How discouraged they are. Are they in pain? Are they frustrated? Again, we don't have time for you to add face recognition to your ASL system, but anyone who's engaged in an educational task or learning by demonstration, you can get very frustrated very easily. How does the robot signal affordances? Right? I'm here, the robot is trying to signal, I'm here to help you get better, but I am not going to overly challenge you. We may want to make the robot not look scary, but how does it act in a way that says, I'm with you, this is going to be as painless as possible?
Have it say I'm with you as soon as possible.
Possibly we could have it say that. I don't know if that's going to be very convincing.
Have it make a smile, a robot smile.
Absolutely, like Kismet here, right? Maybe we give it a face and we use facial expressions to also signal, I'm with you, I know you're in pain, I know this is difficult, and so on. Okay, think on that. You have a quiz due tonight. Please read the final project document, and I will see you next Tuesday.